Hello everyone, this is Ari Moshe Wolf of Heart and Soul Centered Astrology. This channel is devoted to teaching astrology in service to our awakening as the love that we are. I'm going live here, and I hope this is working. Looks like it is. I'm going to be sharing my teachings now on Uranus in Gemini. I'm going to read from a recent article that I wrote and expand upon it as I go. If you want to receive these articles in your inbox, you can subscribe to my newsletter in the description below. So the focus of this teaching is going to be on Uranus and the awakening of thought, the liberation of our minds. I'm going to start by offering a basic perspective for how to understand Gemini. So Gemini is about the left brain, our empirical reality, how we collect data and organize our thoughts. Gemini corresponds to data, facts, and information, as well as the opinions and the logical conclusions that we form based upon our intake of the world around us. And what's important to understand is our intake of the world around us is actually it's based in a sensual experience, right? We take in raw experience through our senses, hearing, smelling, touching, and the mind gives it a classification. We give names to that which we're sensually experiencing. And these names allow us to categorize and give context to other things that we're all experiencing. So we create thoughts, and these thoughts connect with other thoughts. So we can communicate about these thoughts, talk about it, receive new information. So we're constantly expanding our logical framework of reality and how things work and how it all pieces together. Naturally, within the Gemini realm, there's always more to see, right? We can always be giving name and giving our mental attention to more nuance, more detail, classifying more experience, connecting more of the dots. And the truth is, most of us form our opinions and our conclusions based on very loosely formed ideas. Like we hear something, we read something, and it's very easy to say, oh yeah, well that means that, right? We apply our existing logical framework to new information, and the new information will just kind of fit into what we already know. Which means seldomly are we really learning anything new. We're unaware of the extent to which we don't really often know very much about the things that we talk about. We mostly loop within existing and predictable logical frameworks, in the same way that most of us will get our news media from the same predictable news sources, and it's going to paint an empirical vision of reality, right? Where the words and the images and the headlines and the conversations will all fit into a particular narrative. It's always logical. It always makes sense, but it's definitely never the full picture, right? There's always going to be another angle, another way to learn, another way to see, more data, more perspective that we're going to be missing. Further, when we form an opinion or a fixed conclusion about something based upon what we think of as our empirical reality, we will generally feel confirmed and right when our logical framework fits into the logical ideas, the narrative of our group or tribe, right? Whatever identity we have, our social sense of identity, the group that we most resonate with, that we want to belong with, when the group resonates with these thoughts, we will feel confirmed. It's almost as if critical thinking stops there, because, oh, these ideas, these thoughts, these conclusions conform with what my group already believes. So to a significant degree, our learning process is often just cut off short by our need to belong and to feel validated and confirmed and to conform to whatever social identity we're wanting to uphold. Now, we look at Uranus here, Uranus being the function of freedom and liberation, always relative to what is known and conditioned. When we place Uranus in the empirical sign of Gemini, we're asked to think for ourselves. Thought that has no context. It's not about, does this thought resonate with my church, with my group, my political party? Are my friends on social media thinking that? Is this the slogan of the time? It's thought that comes from an unconditioned place. And do we really know what it means to think for our own selves? To a significant degree, most of us don't even understand what thought is. Like, thought just happens, and we don't even take a moment to contemplate, where is this thought coming from, or who is thinking. If you've ever experienced that in meditation, just kind of getting quiet and becoming aware of the thoughts, and almost getting to a place where it's like getting high enough in our self-awareness, in our observing, that we realize thought is just happening, but we never question them. It's like the premise upon which our thoughts are based. They're just sort of running on their own. But there's a whole lot of assumption and a whole lot of existing logical premises that we just sort of accept. And then we think thoughts based upon that. So thoughts just generally runs and we hardly question it. We may think often that we are asking useful questions, but most of the time we're just resetting the frame for the world that we've already logically ordered in our mind. To think is to observe and watch, to become curious and open, unafraid of what we might learn. To think as a free and autonomous being is to recognize that certain predictable human patterns tend to manifest and repeat, and to consider that these patterns seem to run their course only when we're not aware of them. In other words, the way that we all relate to thought and thinking and how we form ideas and opinions, there's a certain tendency amongst human consciousness that does and will and has always run and manifested to the extent that we're in a trance, to the extent that we're not aware of these patterns. So I want to identify 5 of these patterns that I can think of to set the frame for this. One, as I mentioned, is tribal identity. People who grow up within the context of certain cultures, religions, or tribes will, for the most part, form a logical framework of reality that conforms to that culture, religion, or tribe. I mean, literally, one may not even geographically leave a certain area of life. And if they do, they're still going to be resonating with a way of thinking. It's like how you can travel to a foreign country and kind of recreate a world that just resonates with the city life that you know where you come from. And you're going to find the people to talk to that think the way you think. We always will resonate with that sense of familiarity. Now, 2, status quo reactive listening. Most of us are poor learners. We hear something, it stimulates a thought, and then it immediately elicits thoughts that we already have that this new thought reminds us of. Then we jump to conclusions and go off on our own train of thinking, never having really spent much time with the information, never really learning anything new. We often don't give enough time to absorb or access new insight or information regarding any topic because there's a Gemini security mechanism to kind of have it all logically figured out. So this reactive mind kind of moves towards what I already know to maintain that consistency, and we don't allow for an increasing of intelligence. We don't grow. We don't expand our understanding. The next common pattern amongst humans is the fear of standing out. In a group of people that all think something, most people do not feel secure to stand out, to ask questions, or to risk the possibility of social differentiation. I mean, we all know what it's like, right? To be a part of a group, think about a kid in school and what you're being told, or being a part of any kind of social environment. Everyone's saying something, everyone's thinking one thing, everyone's agreeing. And this agreeability isn't just about data and information. It's almost like the social Gemini reality of like how we interact, the kinds of things you talk about, the things you're allowed to speak to, the conversations you're allowed to have, and the information that's like, that's weird. You don't talk about those things in this community, with this group, right? There's this like conformity. It's a survival dynamic. We don't want to stand out. And so we kind of adopt to the social climate of our social reality. Fear of critical thinking. I would say this is probably the most significant point that I'm going to expound upon. So many souls will simply suppress their own capacity for critical thought when the correct thoughts are constantly being reaffirmed throughout our social reality. This can be enough social media virtue signaling, bumper stickers, and yard sign slogans that tell us what we are supposed to think about everything. So this basically imparts this internal message: conform or be an outsider. It could be, the mainstream media or your community, and it can even be a counterculture community. There tends to be this sort of train of thinking that, even if it's radical thinking, an entire group of people will kind of form around that. And if I think differently, if I question that, that can be huge. I mean, there can be immense social consequences to thinking out of the box of our community. I once saw, I don't know where I saw it, it said, like a bumper sticker or something. It said, "I support what's current." And I love that idea. That really reflects that Uranus and Gemini energy of kind of going along with the bandwagon. That's what's really interesting about Uranus, is as much as it's about individuality and liberation and freedom from the known, in that same sense, it's going to imply exactly where we're not free, exactly where we conform to fit in. And so the last point, kind of expanding upon this, is social momentum. Social trends, ideas, fads, how you dress, public opinions, and the things that everyone talks about are not necessarily descriptive of reality, what's going on, what's objectively important, and they are really not necessarily descriptive of original and creative thinking. They are more so just the momentum people tend to get swept up in. In this sense, masses of people will often consider themselves to be at the cutting edge of thought, having the new and exciting conversation of the time, while at the same time, everyone else at the coffee shop is thinking about the same exact thing, circulating the same ideas with very little new thinking happening anywhere. Uranus corresponds to the idea of social contagion. It almost happens on its own. Ideas and greater observations of reality will actually emerge, opening the doorway to new possibilities, like new pathways of experience happen on its own. But it doesn't necessarily require any personal evolutionary effort on the part of the individual. Most souls will be swept along by these new renaissance of ideas. It's the zeitgeist that's just alive right now. And because we're social beings, we kind of go along with it. But in terms of our own personal evolution, kind of moving beyond the current, the school of thought that everyone's swimming with, that takes not just going along with the existing social momentum. There are always questions, thoughts, reflections, angles, research, data, new and original thought that is not being expressed in the present moment. Even if what's happening in the present moment feels new and original, because it's like, new and original, it's interesting, it's never been talked about before, the masses join along with it. And it's very easy to kind of stop our own learning process because it's just so tempting to get sucked into the collective social momentum. I'm just watching this right now with what recently happened here in the US with Trump saying there's nothing on the Epstein files, cases closed, right? What's really interesting is that's now the topic. This is what everyone's talking about right now. Something else happens, everyone's talking about that. And then all these other last week new and important developments or very important things happening in the world, it's almost like we psychologically tell ourselves, oh, that's not important, simply because it's not in the conversation. But it's not that something has necessarily changed. In a sense, this is a very interesting thing to understand when it comes to our own inner relationship with our true self. It's like if you think of that as news and media, there are all the thoughts that are just sort of popular. It seems like this is what's trending in our own inner life, just as much as like there's a thing that's trending in our social life. It's very easy to forget for an indefinite period of time, that there's something very interesting and engaging about the inner world. But it's like there's a headline that kind of got our attention for a while. But there's something very interesting on the inside. And we often just forget that for long periods of time. So now, if we can be aware these human patterns exist, then we're a lot less likely to unconsciously fall into them. So here's a frame for understanding this. If you think that the circumstances of Nazi Germany were to repeat in your day and age, that you would certainly see it for what it is, and that you would certainly not join in the momentum, then you might believe that somehow you are immune to the patterning that the majority of humans always seem to fall into, meaning at any day and age, the majority of humans fall into these mental patterns of group thinking, reactive thinking, lack of critical thought, just wanting to be a part of it, joining the group, not wanting to stand out. But if you think that you're just innately immune from that, then you, my friend, are actually most likely to fall into that patterning. We all are. But if we recognize that it's easy to conform, if we can actually be honest with the fact that, I mean, as open-minded as I wanted to think of myself to be, it's actually a very real self-awareness. When I'm in certain groups of people, there is a certain level of, well, that's not all, I'm conforming here. We're all kind of socially aware of what can I say, what can I not say, and to what extent do we suppress our own authentic freedom of speech and freedom of thought to be original to the moment because of our social reality. I think we suppress it more than we realize. But if we're aware of that, if we're aware of how easy it is to conform to the mind of the masses, even a counterculture mass, then we become more likely to take our time in forming an opinion. We're more likely to ask thoughtful questions, and we're going to be more likely to be hesitant in quickly joining a side, regardless of the social signals that are around us. We're more likely to do research and become curious about the things that most people are not thinking or talking about. It's when we notice that we have thoughts that seem to exist on their own, that there's no context for the questions and the thoughts that are arising, that our thoughts are not comparative, they do not exist relative to a specific group or pop cultural line of thinking, then we can know that we are actually beginning to learn. Critical and objective reasoning stands apart from any consensus. It has no agenda to be agreeable or fit into any line of social thinking. This is the essence of Uranus and Gemini. So I'll repeat that. It's thought that has no agenda or no need to make sense or fit into any precedent of any kind of logical framework, any kind of group thinking, any kind of known reality, even if it's disagreeing with the framework that we've already established. This is a Uranian point of liberation. We see something, and suddenly that seeing shatters the framework of the world that we've known. And if we're open to it, that's okay, because it simply says, I was projecting prior to this moment. Projecting. You know, in A Course in Miracles, it emphasizes really fascinating meditation that we're not really thinking thoughts. We're projecting images, which is just a beautiful, it's like a really beautiful thing to contemplate. And to have a thought, to actually think, to see clearly there's an agency, there's a presence, there's an actually being in the present moment. And it's different than a projection. When that happens, it breaks us from everything that we've known. But it's okay, because our security is not dependent upon what we've known. Our security is in ourself and in what we are. But we reach that sort of threshold of insecurity with Uranus always. Like any strong Uranian period, which we're in, it's always going to push us against the threshold of, if I think that, or if I go down that train of thought, if I follow this thinking, or if I kind of observe this question that's arising, or this natural critical reflection, if I allow that, I'm going to be pushing up against everything that I've known, and I'm afraid of that. So we suppress more than we realize. Free thinking means looking at things as they are, unconcerned with what we may find, and truly open to seeing. So at this point, I want to offer a useful reflection for how, in my contemplating on this, how liberation of the mind happens. And it's not necessarily what we would think, right? It's not like we're in a trance and then we wake up from it. Often, there's this really fascinating journey, this need for polarization to begin before we are freed from the trap of dualistic thinking. One of the ways that we hasten our own mental freedom is through the experience of polarization. It's actually a good sign, both sort of on the micro and the macro level, when we find a lot of people swinging from one group to another, or one ideology or one perspective to another. And in each perspective, you have your whole worldview very tidy, very organized, It all makes sense. How you look at things, the news media that you follow, the people you have conversations with. But then you go to this other extreme. What's actually happening from an evolutionary perspective is an early stage of the mind being freed from polarization. So this sounds paradoxical, but it's the expansion of polarization that always precedes its dissolution. I'll say that again. The expansion of polarization always happens before the dissolution of that polarization. For example, here in the US, many former Democratic or otherwise liberal-oriented individuals have voted for Trump or joined the Republican Party or joined MAGA in some form, right? And not all of them will be like, right? And then we have the opposite too, right? But we have a very strong contingency of people that are were disillusioned by the liberal politics and by Democratic politics. I know a lot of people that voted Republican that support Trump, right? For this apparent switch to happen, an individual had to have become adequately alienated by way of their existing party or group affiliation. It was the fact of the group affiliation in the first place, there being an identity here, that set in motion the inevitability of this alienation, meaning you can't be alienated from a group if you don't identify with that group in the first place. Once this initial differentiation occurs, the process of critical thinking actually really begins, wherein the individual decisively steps out of the security of their existing social identity. Right? Their entire social reality, they're beginning to question it. In doing so, they will have likely formed views and opinions that are very different from their family members, from their friends, right? There's a very active Uranian sort of stepping out of the known, even if they're just going to join some other crystallized group. A process of individuation already began. And in this individuation process, even if it means joining another group, the individuation is a seed that will continue to grow. This soul will inevitably reach a point where they will once again face the incongruencies of their existing logical framework, and will have to find a way to reconcile with that. And again, we're seeing this right now in this present moment. News headlines keep on changing, right? I'm seeing many Trump supporters and people who have these really famous podcasts that advocated for Trump are now openly saying that they made a mistake because Trump isn't releasing the Epstein files, and a lot of people turned towards Trump and really believed, okay, he's going to be transparent. He's going to reveal all the things that at least the liberal side is hiding. But now it's like, well, he's not doing that. A lot of people are saying things like, he promised to deport all the criminals, but with some critical thinking. And this is a really beautiful insight I've heard from people that are, former MAGA or former Trump or sort of disillusioning MAGA supporters, right? The critical thinking is this, okay, if they're increasing funding for all the ICE agents, and the ICE agents are arresting any migrant, right? And they have a 3,000 deportee arrests a day quota. It may have increased since then, but that's what I last heard from, Stephen Miller, 3,000 people a day. If you want to reach that quota, you're going to have to go to the places where you can arrest as many people as possible. If you're going to focus on the criminals first, which is what he promised, well, that's going to take time, right? You got to find the criminals. It takes a lot more time, energy, and resource to get the criminals, right? So I think that's a very brilliant logical pathway, right? But not everyone's thinking that. But you start to, gather the data, and there's sort of this, Uranian push from the crystallized Saturn world that we try to crystallize. It's like, but here's a thought. There's an incongruency here. There's an incongruency here, right? And what's amazing about this whole Uranian process is fundamentally at the ground, it's not about, one party, another party. This movement between polarities is to actually reveal what's beyond the dualities. It's a fascinating process. What results is an objective perspective that could not have been achieved had the initial differentiation and polarization never have happened in the first place. Between point and counterpoint, conclusion, and then, here's another argument with that conclusion, is an infinity of data. Dualities highlight what is beyond opposites. in my own tuning into this, there's a fractal reality that occurs in which the initial polarization births an infinite, inexpressible degree of perspective and counter-perspective. This is kind of how we get lost in thought, because we want something to be true, and then there's, oh, but this, or this memory, or this piece of information, it could be an emotional in contemplation or opinions about data, right? And then we have to take that and rework it to fit into our existing framework until that new data is so great that it shatters Uranus, that existing framework, and then we have some sort of new framework, and it just kind of continues to go. What's difficult with Uranus is it's an ongoing shattering process until we get secure enough with not knowing. Until we are secure enough with not needing to crystallize an opinion. This is where Jeff Green really beautifully speaks to the difference with Uranus and Gemini between facts and opinions. Opinions are the mental classifications that we're projecting onto our reality based upon what we know. We see an image of something and we say, oh, that person is this, this, and that, versus describing the image in very objective, concrete terms. So this ongoing process of liberation occurs as we kind of become more of a witness to the nature of duality itself, and how our own need to belong, our own attachment to our group identity keeps us stuck in these dualities. And I think that the question for everyone with this Uranus and Gemini is, well then, what side am I on? And well, what if you're not? What if there's a version of reality that isn't about a side? Can we even conceive of that? What is innately exists? The facts of reality are, and this is where there's an intelligent design to reality. I mean, there's a way of seeing and a way of understanding our own collective evolution that's far beyond. There are solutions and insights that are so far beyond anything that we've been thinking of yet at this point in time. Liberation from polarization is inevitable, and it brings the emergence of thought that we've never thought. But often we really need to experience that polarization first. Few recognize this reality because the extremity of the present social polarization keeps us very short-sighted, missing the larger archetypal process at play. And so when dualities and perspectives are strong, it's actually a sign that we're moving in the right direction. If you think about this, the idea of the need to fit in or join the slogans, and we don't want to say the wrong thing, the extent to which that inhibits critical thinking means we're going to suppress the possibility of a vision or of a seeing that actually might really support in our collective liberation. The extent to which we're afraid of being different is the extent to which we actually inadvertently keep us from contributing to our collective humanity. Something to really think about. On the edge of being different, on the edge of standing out, on the edge of people disavowing us or criticizing our thoughts is something quite helpful and useful. And so Uranus says that thought, it's only a matter of time, Saturn, until that kind of reaches the consensus, right? Every new Uranian perspective or insight ultimately makes its way into the consensus reality. But it starts with a few people kind of grabbing it, right? Like thoughts, original thought is more so an uninterrupted thought. It's a thought that's not being forced. We grab it, we catch it. Our antennae access it, right? Like we're apprehending the intelligence of creation itself. And it's going to come through our own filter. But because it's real, it's not made up. It's only a matter of time until that realness makes its way into the status quo. Okay. So on this note, I want to end this talk with a few summarized points. May we all remember to breathe and take the time to think. Clear thinking elicits perspective and sometimes a question that we will never have before thought. Do not be afraid to ask questions or to think of things that others don't. Chances are many other people are on the verge of the same question. It just needs to be liberated. Don't think yourself to be immune from group thinking. If we understand the weakness of human behavior, then we are a lot more likely to break free from it than from those who are not aware of this uniqueness within themselves. A fascinating pattern in the ongoing wheel of incarnation is to repeat the same thoughts and conclusions over and over and over again, applied in seemingly new situations with new bodies and new relationships, all while unaware of the fact of this repetition. It's our own agency of thought, our capacity for freedom that allows us to break free from these patterns. This moment can be seen different because it is not the past, other than the repetition of how we have responded to it. We can see this present moment different than how we've seen it if we can recognize that the way that we're seeing it right now is how we've been seeing it for a long, long, long time. That's why archetypal patterns repeat themselves through history in drag, in new clothing, new circumstances, right? New apparent victim perpetrator, but it's the same archetypal patterns. And we replay it over and over and over again until we can see it. Once we see it, we offer new thought and offer new responses. That's why a lot of what's happening right now, in my view, is a very strong archetypal repetition, much of what's happened in the 1930s. To see it, and there's actually a lot of reincarnation of many of those figures in Germany in the 30s, in various parts of the world, in particular in the US. That's just my own internal insight, and it is what it is. Sag Jupiter is intuition. I don't have to be right about that. Uranus Gemini is, there are those, and I'm not one of them, who are at a level of intelligence that they can see the algorithm, right? They can see the logical structuring and karma and how it works, how it plays out. They can observe the mechanics of evolution from the sort of the intelligent design of the video game creator. These people can see these things. They can see the nature of the soul's reincarnational journey through literally perception. This is an important thing that I'll close on this point. Our capacity for freedom of thought is not universal, meaning we don't all have the same ability to think clearly. Our capacity for learning is limited by the capacity of our own ability to see. We can't see what we're not able to or ready yet to see in our own evolutionary journey. There's a Kabbalistic idea called klipot, which are like curtains. Or this idea that when we're born, there's a great forgetting. We forget where we come from. We forget our past. We forgot the astral. We forgot these past lives. And so we recreate circumstances and we're sort of playing it out, but in a sort of subliminal trance. We're not aware of where we come from. And so there's a lot of repetition that happens on this evolutionary journey. As we evolve, we begin to see our life experience in more objective, archetypal, universal terms. And we're able to free. I mean, we kind of free ourselves from the personalness of our experience. But this only happens as we evolve. We can be given hard cold evidence and information, right? And at our stage of evolution, meaning whatever we're attached to, whatever is in our soul program that we're working out, it's going to limit our ability to see anything new, even if it's right in front of us. So I remember I once watched this documentary with someone close to my life, but who lives in a very Newtonian physical worldview. Like what you see is what you get, right? So a different world than me, right? And I wouldn't expect them, like the majority of humans on this planet. It's not in their evolutionary program to be accessing more of the subtle dimensions of life. So you watch this UFO documentary on UFOs and crop circles, like undeniable evidence that it's real, it exists, I've experienced it personally, but that doesn't matter. It's like, oh, it's interesting, but it's like literally the mind isn't able to, it's like a dissonance. It can't integrate it because it doesn't fit into the mental framework that is relevant for that soul's current evolutionary program. Does everyone understand that? We're not going to learn what doesn't fit into the framework of our own evolutionary needs. We have to work through our own desires, our attachments, our fixations, the content of our evolutionary journey. And we're not going to be able to open our mind beyond the threshold of that evolutionary program. And so we're going to resonate with a certain social reality and groups of people and narratives, right? We're going to be evolving from there to some other experience, but we're not going to be evolving from there to like mind open, God is the only reality, all of this is an illusion. That's not how the evolutionary journey works. So it's important to appreciate that this process of liberation is so vast. The intelligent design of reality and how we can actually understand and logically, empirically name, classify, and communicate and talk about the mechanics of reality it's opening, it's growing right now. And there are souls that are definitely on a more cutting edge of that. And yet, as a humanity, we're very, very far from really grasping how this works. I think that's something that we only really access at higher stages of evolution. Swami Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru, who is the founder of this evolutionary astrology modality, is an example of that. He's a profound astrologer. He actually brought these teachings forward and taught Jeffrey Wolf Green, my teacher, kind of downloaded this information. So for all of us, this threshold of evolution is going to take us to seeing more clearly and breaking out of the existing trends of the world that we've known. I have a really great talk about this that I'm going to actually put on sale as soon as I, this is a live video right now, but I'm going to, soon, today. 2 talks that I think are really relevant to this. One is a talk on Uranus and past life memory, where I speak about the inherent relationship between Pluto and Uranus. Pluto being the sort of the root ball, the core evolutionary program, and Uranus the roots, and thus the subliminal subconscious memories that we carry from the past, projecting and influencing our perceptions in the current life. And another is a talk that my friend Jason Holly and I gave on the Saturn-Uranus relationship and transit in the natal chart. I think both talks would be really helpful for understanding Uranus and Gemini. So what's interesting is actually, as I'm teaching, Uranus is in Gemini right now and will be trining Pluto in Aquarius for several years. Of course, Pluto in Aquarius is ruled by Uranus and Gemini. So these evolutionary themes that I'm describing and more are so deeply relevant. And if you just think about our capacity for perception is defined or limited by our stage of evolution, what's the edge of your own evolutionary growth? Like, where are we invited to become more of an observer? Like Uranus and Gemini speaks to the repose of the quiet mind, non-reactive, not quick to form a conclusion, cultivating more grounded observation. So we can better see and observe the mechanics at play, witnessing it. And we can direct that on the inner plane as well, in our own inner discovery. And I think for many of us, Uranus and Gemini, with that trine to Pluto, can really offer a profound inner opening of our own spiritual development. May that be so. I think that there's something very powerful that it's inviting and impelling for all of us right now, almost like a greater clarity of vision and seeing. Lastly, I want to say that as I'm sharing this teaching, Saturn's actually stationing retrograde right now. There's a sextile between Uranus in Gemini and Saturn retrograde in Aries, and actually they're going to stay in that sextile for like the next 6-7 months. So Saturn retrograde actually has a sort of Uranian quality to it. So this is a very interesting dynamic. Consider that Saturn being sort of the opposite of Uranus, its structure, definition, the known. When Saturn moves retrograde, we're stopping, we're kind of breaking ourselves from those conditioning. We're bringing in more introspection. There's a lot more contemplation and reflection upon the structural reality of our life. Right, so Saturn retrograde archetypally kind of brings us into this more, hey, I'm going to question the patterns. What's brought me to where I am right now? How have I become conditioned? How has my life become conditioned to be formed to be what it is right now? I need to reflect and contemplate, where do I want it to go? What do I need to change? Right, so it's a very sort of, you kind of go within and individuate. You break from the known, from the status quo, from the way things are, from the precedent with Saturn retrograde in that sextile in Aries. So there's a lot of, I need to take agency to define my life in my own way. Right? How am I disciplining myself? Where am I really going? I mean, there's a huge amount of self-reflection with the Saturn retrograde right now. In a sextile with Uranus and Gemini, both, there can be a strong emphasis of really looking, really kind of taking a step back and looking at our lives and having these new thoughts, being able to see where we're going or what choices we're facing right now, almost like pathways we didn't consider because we weren't free enough to consider them. And we're afraid. I mean, fear will keep us from seeing things that are right in front of us. This is like walking through the street and you're like pausing for a moment. Where am I going? And you kind of connect to like, what's my intention? What's my purpose? What am I really committed to long-term Saturn, right? And then Uranus in Gemini opens up the doors like, wow, I was just kind of following this pattern, walking on this road, but here's an alleyway. All right, I don't have to walk, you know? I can get on a bike. I can hitchhike. It's like the whole world opens up as new pathways and possibilities become available. And how we map. I mean, I talk about this a lot, but was it a few days ago I was walking and I found 2 new fig trees. 2 new fig trees. I didn't know they existed. Big, full figs. And I didn't pick them because I want to knock on the door, but it wasn't the right moment. But I want to go back there and, you know, maybe in the evening time when people are home and knock and say, can I please pick your figs? I live for that. From like your Uranus and Gemini perspective, you know, think of Gemini as vehicle or communication, right? How we travel locally and we kind of have a map. That's why it's local, like our map of our local reality, how we framed it in our mind. That's why it's local travel. And so you kind of break out of the conditioned patterns of local travel. Where you've driven, you begin walking. And you experience and you see things from a completely different perspective. You can also get in a helicopter metaphorically. Get into that metaphorical bird's eye view, and you can see the whole system. Right? You can see like the whole ecosystem, how it operates as a unison, versus when you're in it, you see the disparate parts, they're not connected. But when you're at the higher level of consciousness, which is the observer mind, but literally, if you climb a mountain or get into a helicopter, you can see how it all works together as a whole. That's the brilliance and the clear sky open mind of Uranus and Gemini. We can see the mechanics at play even while operating in our day-to-day life. This is a thing that we can all cultivate right now. So let me just see if there's anything else that I wrote in my article. That is all. So once again, check out the description below. If you want to receive these articles in your inbox, I have a newsletter. You can find a link to my sessions. I offer individual sessions, couples readings, and long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. And if you're interested in this work, if you want to learn how to read transits and the natal chart from an evolutionary perspective, I have a self-study training program that you can enroll in any time of the year. I also have a live program that I begin every year around March or so. So feel free to check that out and get in touch if you have any questions. Remember to like and subscribe to support this work. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye for now.